Hey everybody, this is Addison Smith with Campus Reform. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. James Moore. Dr. Moore is a professor of industrial and systems engineering at the University of Southern California. He specializes in economic impact analysis relating to transportation engineering, transportation systems, and other infrastructure systems. In 2003, he was elected to the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, United States section for outstanding contributions to the field of transportation systems engineering. And he also received the Kapista Gold Medal of Honor. Recently, Dr. Moore has faced mounting pressure from USC students to remove a pro-police Blue Lives Matter flag from his office door, but he has nonetheless been unwavering in his support for law enforcement and in his strong opposition to cancel culture on his own campus. Dr. James Moore, thank you so much for taking time to sit down with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right in to the story. I've teased a little bit of it, but I want to get your personal perspective and your insight of what led up to this outrage from people on campus of you having the Blue Lives Matter flag, how you responded, how things are going. So give us a rundown of the events that led up to this.
All right. Well, I decided to hang the flag at the top of the academic year, which was the end of August here at USC. Flag was up for most of the semester. Then I was contacted by the student newspaper, the Daily Trojan, and they wanted some backstory on the flag. They told me there were some students who were unhappy about it. So I tried to explain to them why the flag was there and what it was intended to represent and why I wanted it there. I offered to talk with the students. Did eventually talk with the students, although that was not for a bit. Then I heard from the School of Engineering, not from the central administration of the university, but from a member of the dean's office. I got a polite phone call and a request to consider putting the flag inside my office rather than on the door. The individual who called me was a little vague, in my opinion, about what the motive for that request was and where it was coming from. I did eventually acknowledge that it had come through the central administration, which is typical of the way universities operate. They try to leave action close to the location where they think it's needed. And it helps them avoid accountability for ideas that might turn out to be controversial. But after this, I still didn't know at that point exactly who in the central administration had asked the School of Engineering to act or what the grounds for the action were. I declined to take the flag down. It was a polite, friendly conversation. I mean, everybody involved knows each other. I thought it was logical that the school would make this request if in fact the central administration had asked them to. I followed up subsequently and I asked if the school could tell me what direction the request came from. And it came from, oddly enough, our human resources department. And this is unusual. It's rare that our human resources function gets involved in anything relating to faculty discourse, faculty comments, faculty positions. I found it really very novel. I figured it had probably, pardon me, had probably come through the provost's office. It did not. So I did communicate back with the central administration and explain to them the grounds for my decision and what I was trying to accomplish. Did get a call subsequently from some of the students that our student newspaper had indicated were upset by the flag and had a Zoom call with them. And they're clearly very nonplussed by the flag. But it was civil, friendly. We've traded some information, and they have asked me again if I'll take down the flag, and I owe them a return call telling them that I've decided I don't believe I'll take it down, that I like it right where it is for the reasons I originally put it there. Those reasons were, I wanted to communicate to conservative students on campus that their point of view was recognized because you wouldn't know it from the messaging they receive in this organization. From the president, the provosts, the everybody in the central administration, every public statement about any current event or social context is predicated on a progressive point of view. And it's as if competing points of view simply need not be introduced. And so I was trying to signal the conservative students that I knew were on campus, because I advised some student groups that in fact there is space for a competing point of view. It's a university, and that's what we're founded on.
And it's not just that at the University of Southern California you wouldn't know it, but it's college campuses around the country. You want to know it. Here at Campus Reform, we've written over 11,000 stories highlighting the bias and abuse against conservatives that happens on college campuses every day. And going back to your reasoning for hanging the flag up, when I was reading up on it, one of the reasons you gave was you also wanted to signal that the police are a force for good for all communities in America, Black, white, brown, you name it. You said that blue lives protect Black lives. And so part of your reasoning seems to also be to tell students, hey, I know you guys think that police are disparaging the Black community, but they actually help the Black community is what you seem to imply. So elaborate on that a little bit.
I don't mean to imply it. I mean to be explicit about it. I mean, when I chose to put that flag up and to display it as prominently as I did, there were multiple reasons why. Part of it was just related to my own immediate experience on campus. Part of it was pedagogic and touches broader social issues. The story that Black lives are at risk from the police is not borne out in the data. A lot of the data that we see takes the number of Black Americans and the frequency of police contact and strikes a ratio between the two and points out that, well, gee, if you're Black in the US, you're more likely to be in contact with the police or injured by the police or harmed by the police in some way or killed by the police. But all of this really washes out the influence of the rate at which police come in contact with Black Americans versus white Americans versus brown Americans. So Blacks are 13 times more likely to be the victims of homicides than whites. And this is largely because the violence that Blacks experience are coming not from white Americans and not from the police, but from other Black Americans. And so the police find themselves in a circumstance where if they are trying to interdict crime, they are in environments with a lot of Black people, and they're there to protect the Black people who are in those environments. That's what they're trying to accomplish. And the premise that the frequency with which the rank and file population falls into any one racial category or another defines the frequency with which police are likely to be in contact with those individuals is nonsense. There are great differences in the likelihood of police contact across various racial groups. And one of the implications of those differences is that police are going to be in contact with Black Americans more frequently. And given once that contact has occurred, there is no disproportionately violent behavior on the part of police. If you look at the rates at which police have to use deadly force when you are given that you are dealing with a Black individual or given that you are dealing with a white individual or a brown individual, in fact, the police show considerable restraint on average when they're dealing with Black people. And It's just that they have to deal with Black people so often in their jobs that they find themselves frequently needing to exercise force to execute those jobs. And there will be a disproportionate impact on Black people if police do their jobs and do them objectively and fairly, because the police are brought into contact with Black Americans due to the risks that crime impose on Black Americans. They face an elevated risk. So there will be an elevated likelihood of contact with police. And this story that the police are somehow seeking out the Black population to harm them, or have singled them out to try to harm them, is just utter nonsense. And if you look at the behavior of police, once they are in contact with any member of a racial group, it's the impression you come away with, the understanding you come away with, is that they really are proceeding in a very even-handed way. The left never talks about Black victims, because talking about Black victims means talking about Black crime, and talking about Black crime means focusing on cultural failures. I mean, we've done terrible things. The legacy of racism in this country has been really hideous, and it has placed a large share of the Black population in a very disadvantaged posture. There's no real question about that. But you know, we don't have a solution at this point. We don't know what to do to get ourselves out of this posture, but it's not going to involve lying to ourselves. I mean, the numbers are the numbers. The police are the police executing their work is keeping Black Americans alive. I mean, alive. We're on a trajectory to see 10,000 Black deaths due to crime in this year. Blacks are victims more frequently than anybody else, more than whites, Asians, brown folks combined. Right. So I'm really tired of the story that the police are the problem. There are people who are bad at their jobs in every profession. There are bad college professors, and there are bad journalists, and there are bad police officers, and there are people in those professions who are trying to do their jobs well. And the premise that the police are failing to do their job well on average is a falsehood. So that was the largest external point that I really wanted to make when I hung that flag.
Right. And here at Campus Reform, we have covered for a pretty long time this campus trend of this spite for police. And it seems that it's not that the campus left spite for police coincides with their distaste for the American system writ large. They seem to insist that police are part of the broader system in America that is rigged against people of color. Needless to say, that's a pretty Marxian idea that everything is oppressed versus oppressor. Everything comes down to a systemic issue. So the police are the bourgeoisie, right, and everyone else is the proletariat. What do you think is the driving factor that's causing students to think this way? Is academia one of those factors to blame for students starting to adopt this idea?
They don't all think this way, which is part of the other reason that the flag was up. They receive very uniform messaging. I would say part of the problem is something I didn't anticipate when I joined USC's faculty. When I got here in 1988, we had a fairly broad range of views present on the faculty. There's always, I think, been a tendency for university work, particularly in the social sciences and humanities, to attract people with something of a collectivist point of view. And it may be that the social sciences and humanities, economics aside, are just not all that objective in terms of how the world is viewed. And complete objectivity is kind of sterile, right? You're talking about disciplines where creativity and subjectivity have value. And sometimes subjective creative people have foolish ideas, right? Sometimes they have great ideas and they move us ahead. But there was a narrow majority of left-leaning faculty in these disciplines. And given the way universities operate, faculty hire faculty. Faculty decide collectively who will join the group. And if you've got a majority of folks who are very intolerant of the points of view of other people, they are going to acquire colleagues who have points of view similar to their own. And that effect took a long time. It didn't happen overnight, but eventually universities became, to a large extent, monocultures. Large swaths of universities became monocultures. And the leadership of universities, to try to appeal to the largest constituency possible and be taken as seriously as possible by the people who were reporting to them, began to message a very progressive point of view, because they knew that there was a majority of faculty, and a growing majority of faculty on campus, that would respond to that point of view and support them, and hopefully collaborate and cooperate with them. And as a result, students get a very uniform set of messages on college campuses. Now, you're right, not just USC, but the entire academy, with a few exceptions, seems to have gone this way. In addition, there's been some influence, I think, on the part of the risks of taking federal money. I mean, we do most of our research using federal support in this country, not all of it. I like research. I want research to be done, but federal money comes with strings. And if you've got an administration with a progressive agenda, they are going to try to promulgate that agenda any way that they can, including episodes like the 2011 Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education, which really turned Title IX upside down and attempted to replace conventional ideas about fairness and justice with a rather unconventional set that I don't think are terribly workable. So part of it is the influence of the federal government and liberal administrations in the government, and liberal bureaucrats within the government, promoting their point of view and using the leverage of federal dollars to do that. Part of it is responding to a sort of accidental, small majority of liberally inclined faculty that became a large majority, leaders at college campuses needing to position themselves to elicit cooperation and responsiveness from those groups. And ultimately a very almost homogenous stream of messages about how the world ought to be organized and what makes the most sense and what's right and wrong, that is really very one-sided, that students have to live with. And sometimes students are influenced by this, and sometimes what they have read or what they have learned previously or what they have learned from their families allows them to continue to think more critically, and they think a little bit more carefully. But what's really happening, in my opinion, is not necessarily a wave of progressivism among students, but a reduction in our capacity for critical thinking. And I don't know exactly where that's coming from. Could be the weakness of public education, right? We've seen school choice, I think, offers a lot of opportunity for improvement, but we're not there yet. By and large, public schools are failures, and we're producing students who are walking across the threshold at universities and not really thinking for themselves, and not being encouraged to think for themselves, quite the opposite. And as a result, there's a significant share that won't.
And a lot of that, the lowering of the academic standards, the reduction in critical thinking that you mentioned, a lot of that is also due to this hyper-racial mentality. We've covered a lot of schools who have done away with SATs, or who have proposed things like labor-based grading, where things will be graded based on the amount of time you spend on the assignment rather than how correct or incorrect the answers are professors grading, lightening up grading essays because somehow language is a tool of white supremacy. We have covered all of that. So we've seen those standards, like you said, dropping dramatically over the years. And we've talked about these problems. I want to get your insight on solutions. Where do you see academia going over the next few years if we don't reverse this trend?
Well, you've asked a difficult and frightening question, right? I am actually hopeful that science and engineering will be able to buck the trend. There are discussions within schools of engineering and departments of physical and natural science that focus on the importance of group identity in hiring. And I'm hopeful that we will reject that we will focus on the work, not who does it. And basically hire the work is my goal. Hire the best producers of product that we can find so that we can produce more valuable, useful product and move our disciplines and society ahead. And be bloodless about that. I think there are many problems with the pipeline that society needs to address, but they can't be addressed by the hiring decisions of university faculty. Basically, you need to hire the highest performers you can find. You've got to be objective about what performance is. The premise of we don't like what the measurements are telling us, so let's stop measuring is anti-intellectual, anti-science, anti-advancement, right? It's anti-human, frankly. It's ridiculous. And I'm always astonished at the amount of nonsense that seems to pour out of schools of education initiatives and faculties. I mean, that seems to be a hotbed for this kind of thinking. Traditionally, schools of education have had the most dogmatic curricula and the lowest admission standards. And as a result, we've gotten scholarship that is nonsense. And unfortunately, some of it has found purchase in universities. Student affairs, for example. We've got a lot of graduate programs in education that produce folks who nominally at least are focused on higher education. What do you do with those folks? In many cases, they've landed in divisions and departments and student affairs functions at college campuses where they've had really very broad influence on students, much broader than you would expect. It's a real concentration of one point of view. So solutions, maybe when it comes to hiring student affairs professionals, look beyond schools of education. Don't exclude them. Good people can be found anywhere, but don't automatically assume that the logical source of personnel for that kind of function is a school of education. It really isn't. It's somebody with a broader understanding of the world. Science shouldn't back down. Science and engineering should face the firestorm of criticism they're going to get for not embracing identity politics and not embrace it. Because ultimately we will be better off if we stay the course, and we may yet. It's a possibility. I don't know. I really am discouraged at what I've seen happening in economics and at the fringes of some of the physical sciences. Economics is the intrusion of identity politics in economics has had a double cost because it affects not just economics and social science in general, but business schools where economics is a core concern. Can it be reversed? I don't know. I think that ultimately markets are not chaotic places. They're self-organizing. If you spend time and money trying to obtain credentials that are intended to bring you opportunity and it doesn't work, other options will emerge. Maybe the solution, if we think about what universities are supposed to accomplish, maybe the solution is that some of the people who are at universities actually need to be in vocational or apprentice programs. Maybe that's where opportunity is. And you've asked an open-ended question. I'm offering open-ended responses. There may be too many people in college and there may be too many people in college studying things that are interesting and of intellectual value, but not really of commercial value. So eventually, the folks that take those credentials are going to be impacted by their choices, and then they'll revise their choices. So that is a sort of solution that emerges in a marketplace for ideas. That marketplace is still operating. So I think that a lot of these institutional peculiarities that we find ourselves in now, pardon me, are going to be undermined by the way markets for ideas operate. We may see great things come out of the Austin University experiment. I really don't, I'm not close to that. All I know is what I read about it. But that's an example of university choice. We talk about school choice and giving students an alternative to the public school experience. We will see more of that. So long term or long run, if I take the societal view of this, I think part of the solution is as much school choice as possible. If I was king, we'd all be much poorer, but if I was king, I'd separate school and state. I would subsidize households to purchase educational services and let the market respond entirely. But the more market force we can build into pre-college education, the more prepared students are going to be when they get to college. So that's one approach we might take. And I think that the elements of those of universities and colleges, the components of them that are producing students whose credentials are of greatest value in the marketplace have to focus on remaining able to do that, because that will attract people to those disciplines and that will attract people to college. So basically understanding at the center of it, understanding what your values are and sticking to them and applying them and having a rationale for them. I mean, I don't see any moral dimension to market, the way markets operate. I like markets because of the problems they solve and the things they do for societies and populations. And so that's why I want them to operate. And I want to see if we can accomplish whatever we accomplish going forward with more freedom rather than less. And there are people in the academy that continue to think in those terms. So we have to continue to stay focused. And there will be losses. Who knows, maybe we can't salvage sociology. Maybe we can't salvage anthropology. Maybe those fields will have to be irrelevant for a while before somebody has good ideas to introduce and important work to show the world. I don't know what the implications for those sorts of disciplines are going to be. There will be, if they're going to become relevant again, something has to change. What is the mechanism for the change? Ultimately, people who do important work are going to attract more attention and get more accomplished than people who don't. And there is a distance there, when there will eventually become a disincentive to focus on nonsense and noise. Right? And the market will provide that. So there's where my faith is. The market for ideas will ultimately prevail.
Right. And I can only hope, and I'm sure the rest of our audience and millions of other Americans around the country can only hope that your optimism is not in vain and that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel in higher ed. Dr. James Moore from the University of Southern California, thank you very much for sitting down and talking to our audience today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.